Hi everyone. Today we're looking at Code of Fair Testing Practices in Education, Part 3, Reporting and Interpreting Test Results. Now, just as a quick review, our first video was on developing and selecting appropriate tests. Our second was on administering and scoring tests. This video will talk about reporting and interpreting tests. And the final one, Part 4, will be on informing test takers. And all this is brought to you by the Joint Committee on Testing Practices 2004. Still relevant today, still used today. And I will have a link at the end so you can check it out. Now, test developers have the responsibility to report test results accurately and to provide information to aid test users to interpret test results accurately. Accurately being the key word here. It's very easy to take a test result and to get the wrong answer. So it is the job of the test developer to ensure that the test user understands how to interpret the test accurately. Now the test user needs to create a report and interpret the test results accurately and clearly so that everybody understands how they interpreted it, and hopefully they did it right. Test developers need to provide information that supports recommended interpretation of results. And this includes the nature of the content, just to ensure that what is in the test is what people are trying to test for. Also, they need to provide the information on the norms of comparison groups. You know, who was tested? Was it male and female? Was it just men? Was it girls from 6 to 12? They need to be very specific as to where the norms derive from so that they can make accurate decisions as to where a test taker, an individual test taker, is in the norm. And also they need to provide any other information of any other technical evidence that supports how they interpret the results of their tests. They also need to advise test users of limitations, no exaggerations, which means that the test user needs to be clear on what the test is testing, how accurate it is, to what degree. Don't say it's more accurate, don't say it's less accurate, just be very clear on how accurate the test is. Now, test users need to interpret the meaning of the test results, including the nature of the content. That's just understanding the content, understanding where the norms of the comparison groups came from, and any other technical evidence that might be important. They also need to be aware of the benefits of taking said test and the limitations. Now, test developers also need to provide guidance with interpreting modified tests. Modified tests are tests that they change slightly to accommodate someone who might have some kind of special needs. They might not see, or they may not understand in the same language as somebody else in their testing age group. So they need to make accommodations to make sure that all special needs are addressed. And inform the test users of potential issues with the modifications. In other words, making sure that they know if the test taker, because of the modifications, the test results may change, or the interpretation of the test results could change, and you want to make sure that everything is accurately done. Now, test users need to interpret the modified test results and be aware of the administrative differences, which is just saying giving somebody the test in a different way. The possible impact of the test results because of doing it a different way. That's very important, because if there is an inaccuracy and they've kept good records on what they did and didn't do, then they can change it if they need to. Now, test developers need to specify uses for test results, potential misuses, so that when they do define what the results are, that they do that correctly. And now the test users need to select tests that are for the intended purposes established by the developers. But if they have evidence that supports another type of interpretation, that can also be used. But there must be a lot of evidence to support that. Now, test developers need to provide evidence and their rationale for setting the performance standards that they do for these tests, passing scores, what is a passing score, and to avoid any labels that might be discriminatory or might stigmatize somebody who's taking the test. The test user needs to review the procedures for setting performance standards and passing scores and avoid using stigmatizing labels when they explain the results to a test taker. Test developers also need to encourage test users to not base all their decisions on just one test, but to look at the work, that the history of the individual before they make any decisions on if they need to be in a special needs class or if they need to be in a more accelerated class. But they need to look at everything that individual is and has done, not just one test. And of course, it is on the shoulders of the test user to avoid using a single test to make a decision about an individual. Again, you need to make sure to look at everything that individual has done in order to surmise whether they need extra help, whether they need less help, but you need to look at the body of their work. Now, test developers need to provide accurate information to interpret groups that take tests together, and that would include their male or their female or their age group. It needs to be very specific because somebody who's 6 is going to test very differently on an IQ test from somebody who's 19 if they're taking the same test. They also need to include who was taking the test and who was not taking the test in order to make comparisons. And they also need to include any factors that might affect the results, including modified tests. Now, test users need to state the intended use of the tests on groups. In other words, they need to say, you're taking this test because we want to know how you feel about yourself at age 12 versus age 14. They just need to be very clear as to the intention of the tests and who they're testing. They need to avoid grouping test results that do not apply to the intended purpose unless, once again, there is evidence to prove an acceptable difference from the test developer's interpretation. They also need to report procedures that were followed. Again, in case there is any inaccuracies, they have a report that specifies what they did so that they can point those inaccuracies and correct them. Now, test developers need to provide results in a timely fashion and to create results that are understandable to the test user. That's pretty self-explanatory. Test users, on the other hand, need to communicate the test results to test takers in a timely fashion and to make it understandable so that the test taker can understand where they fit in the norms, if there's something that they can improve upon, something that they're doing, that they're excelling at. It's important to be able to tell them how they're doing in a way that they understand. Now, test developers need to provide ways of monitoring to ensure that test results are accurate to their purpose. And it is the job of the test user to develop and implement procedures for monitoring the test or a test use that coincides with the intended purpose. Well, that is the end of part 3. I hope this has been informative for you. I hope you are enjoying this series, and I will talk with you again in part 4.